Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast. It is the Monday show on a Tuesday with myself, Andrew Musgrove, and our Newcastle United editor, Aaron Stokes. As you can see, we both have not made it into the office. I think we were haunted so much by that episode from Newcastle last night that we decided to stay in bed until the latest possible time and then crawl out of it to work today and bring you this wonderfully positive and happy episode. Is that right, Aaron?
Yeah, it's absolutely spot on, as if you've got a little camera in my house there.
That's a little bit weird. That's a little bit weird, but continue. I haven't, by the way, people, but go on.
Wouldn't put it past you. Yeah, look, not the happy, positive reaction that we wanted to last night's defeat. I think you should shoulder quite a lot of the blame, given you were uber confident that Newcastle were going to win. What were they going to win? 3-1?
3-1, yeah. I mean, we'll get onto
This
that in a moment.
this coming from the man who told everybody to keep their feet on the ground after a routine win over Wolves because
I was
we shouldn't
right.
get carried away. But look, yeah, I think the last couple of episodes when Newcastle have lost, we've tried to find as many positives as we can, and I'm sure we'll do that again this week. But I suspect there'll be a lot less positives than there was after Arsenal, because, I mean, to put it mildly, it was just absolutely dreadful last night, wasn't it?
It was awful, and it feels a little bit like Groundhog Day because we're going to be criticising the same elements of Newcastle United's play, and we will do in a moment. But let me just paint you a little story, right? So my poor wife, she's been ill over the last 24 hours, so I've been looking after her, playing doctor. I've been looking after our little baby, and also yesterday setting up the website and what have you for you coming on the late shift because you need the groundwork laying, Aaron. Gets to 10 to 8. I've done the tea, I've done the washing up, all that. I've been brilliant, if I do say so myself. 10 to 8, put the little Ben down. She's she's kicking on a little bit. 10 past 8, she finally goes down. I haven't checked my phone, I haven't got my notifications on. I come down, I'm thinking, do you know what? I'm looking so forward to this game. This is what I've been looking forward to all weekend. And then given what's happened on Monday, it's gotten us through the day. Come down 10 minutes into the game, and Chelsea already one up. And what a deflating feeling that was. I actually then realised I missed Newcastle's best moment of the game. That was apparently the first 6 minutes was quite good. Because certainly after that, it was a little bit dire.
Yeah, maybe you were the jinx then. As soon as you started watching, they went downhill. Look, if I'm completely honest, I don't even think the first 6 minutes were anything to write home about, and I'm sure we'll get on to Eddie Howe's comments and afterwards. But I mean, we were sort of both texting each other last night, like after Eddie Howe came out and said that he thought there was good moments. Was there? Because I certainly didn't see many. And I know Eddie Howe's got to try and pick positives out of performances, and he'll say, look, well, the scoreline wasn't too bad. Newcastle were in it until the last minute, but really, I think that scoreline flattered them, and they gave away very cheap goals, and didn't really look like scoring for the majority of the game. So, as I said a few moments ago, just a really, really disappointing game, and as we discussed, off the back of such a positive win at Wolves, where you thought, okay, is this going to be the springboard? As we keep saying time and time again, it just proves to be another false stone.
Well, let's start there because you're right. I did warn people not to get ahead of themselves after the Wolves performance, and then I didn't listen to my own advice and got well ahead of myself and predicted, as you say, a 3-1 win for Newcastle United. But I was so confident they were going to do it, Aaron. I genuinely felt in my bones that they were going to walk away not only with 3 points, but it was going to be a good performance. On the back of what we saw against Wolves, the fact that everything from a Chelsea point of view was set up in Newcastle United's favour, the pressure on Pochettino. I mean, you saw the relief in his eyes. You saw the relief around the terraces when the final whistle went. It was a game that Newcastle just needed to turn up, show a bit of passion, show a bit of fight, get an early goal, and they would have won that game because of the reaction around the ground, and it didn't happen. Why didn't it happen? Because they were nowhere near the level of performance they showed against Wolves, and we'll get onto the tactical side later on the show. But I just want to start with the passion and fight because it was lacking from the word go.
Yeah, well, we've seen this a few times I was going to say the recent months and the recent weeks, and it sort of reminded me a little bit like Arsenal a couple of weeks ago, where they just looked like there was no intensity, there was no sort of, where's this Newcastle United gone that was nasty and in the faces and pressing and ugly, and there was just none of that last night, as there wasn't at Arsenal either. And I think what you just said there sums it up. A lot of us, probably you more than me, were confident going into this game because we've seen so many teams go to Chelsea this season and just bully them. Teams that shouldn't be going to Chelsea and beating them. And you thought, as you rightly said, if Newcastle could go there and start well and get the first goal and put Chelsea under pressure, especially given the fact that fans were stood in the away end a week ago chanting for Pochettino to go. As John Gibson wrote in his column the other day, this was the perfect time for Newcastle to play Chelsea. And what makes it even more sickening is the fact Chelsea were absolutely average last night. They were bang average and they've scored 3 easy goals and they've made Newcastle look really, really poor. And I think that adds to it. I think if this was Manchester City or this was Tottenham or this was Arsenal or Villa and you were going into a game away from home against a team that was really doing well and you lost 3-2 and you performed like that, you couldn't excuse it, but you could sort of say, okay, we'll hold our hands up, we've been beaten. To lose like that at Chelsea is really, really poor. And maybe you were right that we need to just keep our feet on the ground even when they're recording home wins.
I mean, Chelsea are awful. They're a terrible side. You maybe got 2 players who you would take into the Newcastle United side, but they're a team of individuals. They're not a team. And yet they made Newcastle United look so ordinary, and Newcastle made Chelsea look so good. And given all the pressure and speculation on Pochettino, as you've mentioned there, as we've both mentioned, the feeling within the terraces, Newcastle have missed a massive opportunity. And I do wonder whether this one hurts Newcastle United more than losing to a Luton away, to losing to a Bournemouth away. Less so Bournemouth, but Luton, because that's a shock. They're fighting for their lives. That's a shock. You don't expect that. But to lose against a team that's just below you and is now just a point below you, this hurts more, I think, for Newcastle's season. That's why the victory against Wolves was so important, because it was a team directly above you. Now we should have been beating a team directly below, and they've gained on win. I think this could really hit Newcastle's season hard.
Yeah, look, you've got to hope that it doesn't, and it's probably the worst possible game to come up next is Manchester City away. I know it's not in the league, but obviously then you've got a very long gap until the end of the month when they play West Ham. But you've hit the nail on the head in the sense that because of where Chelsea are in the league and how tight that running is for Europe, getting a win last night would have done so much. 1, for the league table, but 2, mentally to Chelsea and mentally to Newcastle, because it would have given Newcastle massive upper hand. Now, just to sort of flip it, and but we're 8 minutes in, and we should probably get a positive in there, to not be accused of being negative. But Newcastle are very much still in this European race. Okay, 10 games to go. They're only 3 points off 7th. I know that looks 4 or 5 places away at this point, but they're still in there. But there's a big, big if surrounding that. And if they get Europe, and that's putting a really strong run together towards the end of the season now. If you were sat here right now and saying, oh, Newcastle are going to do it, I'd probably say no, because the evidence of the last few weeks shows that they can't put together a run.
I was going to say, who are they beating? Because they can't beat teams above them, they can't beat teams below them. They might not even be able to beat themselves, to be quite frank.
No, this is what I mean. I mean, you can't sit here full of confidence that they're going to do it. I mean, West Ham on the 30th is an absolutely huge game, given that West Ham could potentially pull 6 points clear of them in that race for Europe. They've then got to still play Tottenham, who are still up there, Man United away. I mean, the other games on paper, you'd think, okay, they've still got to play Brighton. They've got to play the teams in and around them. And based on last night's evidence, you wouldn't really count on them beating any of them. But equally, this is, Eddie Howe's Newcastle United, and they've proven time and time again they can, pull things out the fire. But it's hard to sort of sit here and think, okay, I'm still feeling confident. And I am really just clutching at straws at the fact that Newcastle are only 3 or 4 points away from a Conference League spot. But they need to turn it around and start putting a run together.
I guess those on that wave of positivity would say, well, look, okay, we've lost to Chelsea. It wasn't pretty, but then the week before we beat Wolves, who are in and around that level. We dominated them on the pitch, 3 goals. It was a great performance. So, you've got to look at that, and you can take that above the Chelsea performance, and that is a positive. The gap to 7th is a positive. But I think the big issue, and we've mentioned it plenty in recent weeks, is it's all about consistency, isn't it? Yeah. That's what's missing from Newcastle United's game. And until they can put a consistent run of form together, we're going to be going back and forth, because look, they may well pick up a win against West Ham. It would be a massive win, but then it's Everton the week after, and you could see them losing to Everton. So I think we need to see consistency, and how Eddie Howe does it, I'm not too sure, because it is, it's a massive problem.
But we've been saying this for about 2 months, and the fact is, every time we think Newcastle have turned the corner, they just seem to, revert back to type. I mean, they beat Fulham and Villa at the end of January, and then they went and drew with Luton 4-4 in a game they should have won. They then got back on track by beating Forest away from home in a really good result. They draw at home to Bournemouth the next week and then get absolutely hammered off Arsenal. There's just no, even though Newcastle's results have turned since the end of January compared to the turn of the year, they just can't string these wins together. And I think if they don't change that in the final 10 games, they're really gonna struggle to get European place. Now, I think at this stage of the season, it's still salvageable in terms of the season being a success. But they need a European spot, even if that's the Conference League, and they need really to get past Manchester City in the FA Cup, which I don't think many of us are really thinking they're going to do. But if they don't do either of those things and they finish outside the top 7 and they get knocked out of the FA Cup in the quarterfinals, given the way they went out of Europe and the Carabao Cup, I think you'd have to really chalk this down as a really, really awful season for Eddie Howe and Newcastle.
You say it's salvageable, and it is in terms of what Newcastle United can do, but we're betting on Newcastle United doing it, and I'm not betting on Newcastle United doing it because they're so inconsistent.
No, I completely agree with you, and as I've just said, I think after last night, I certainly have lost all confidence I had last week when I thought Newcastle were back and they were really going to make a push for the top 6 or 7.
I warned you.
But this is the thing, because knowing how fickle I am, and dare I say how fickle some football or Newcastle fans are, if by some miracle they go and beat Manchester City, which isn't out of the realms of possibility, and then they get a win over West Ham, I'll be the first one to sit on here and say, look, they're back and they're going to get Europe and all this, and the season's going to be rosy. But this is the thing. We've been flip-flopping the last 2 months, and it needs to stop. We need to actually see Newcastle put together 2 or 3 results, and they're rapidly running out of time. They're running out of players. They're running out of ideas. And I think Eddie Howe, dare I say, is running out of time a little bit to get fans fully back on side. Me and you both subscribe to the fact that he should be given time. I don't think either of us are close to being Eddie Howe out. But I think some fans, especially looking at the reaction after Arsenal and after Luton and after Chelsea last night, I think some fans are looking at the glistening names that are available and thinking sentimentality's got no room in this football club anymore. You've got to get someone else in. And I think Eddie Howe needs to turn the corner for himself and also for the football club.
I think where that reaction kind of comes to the front is when you look at how Newcastle United set up last night. The set up totally different to how they did against Wolves, which worked really, really well. And I mean, usually when they set up differently, it doesn't work. What you'll get is you'll get some reaction on social media, or you'll get a commentator making a point to pundit. But what you actually had was you had fans pointing out on social media, you had the commentator pointing out in coverage, and then you had both pundits pointing it out afterwards as well. That Newcastle United should have set up in the way they did against Wolves, because Chelsea struggle with that team sitting deep, absorb the pressure, and then hit on the counter. And for whatever reason, Newcastle tried to play the high press, totally backfired. Why did Eddie Howe do it? Why didn't he just stick to something that worked so well against Wolves and got them the all 3 points?
I mean, I've been asking myself this question for 15 hours. I can't understand it, as you've rightly pointed out. Chelsea, really struggle when they're trying to break teams down, and we saw how well it worked at Wolves. And with the players that Eddie Howe has had to start in the last couple of weeks, it seems tailor-made for that situation. If you've got Miggy, Gordon, and Isak able to run off, on counter attacks, it's absolutely fantastic and it works wonders. And for whatever reason, and if I'm completely honest, I know you said at the very start about Newcastle being good the 6-7 minutes. They weren't really. They enjoyed a lot of the ball, a lot of territory, a lot of possession, but they didn't actually, threaten in any real way. And that was really the story of the first half, until Alexander Isak just seemed to pluck one out of thin air, as he often does. The plan just was not working from minute one, whatever the plan was. And as you said again at the very top of the show, we're constantly sat here talking about the same negatives the same indecision from Howe, the same decisions to play certain players and not take players off. I mean, I understand that there's sort of caveats for these two substitutions last night, but Sean Longstaff staying on the pitch last night was an absolute joke. He was the worst player on the pitch by a mile, and he was the only midfielder that managed to play 90 minutes for Newcastle. Now, I know you're taking Bruno off because the game's gone and you don't want him booked, and Willock's probably still coming back to full fitness. But, anybody could see that Sean Longstaff should have been hooked last night, and he wasn't. And again, this is where Eddie Howe is probably going to face pressure in that, we're talking about these decisions all the time. The decision about Dan Burn has, dragged on for months, and it will continue to drag on. The Miggy situation, and I know they're hamstrung a little bit by injuries and players being fit, but last night I think some of the decisions were just very, very questionable for me.
Yeah, and that's what I mean about the original point, is that the pressure will ramp up from fans because of these decisions, which people assume are easy decisions to make the other way, i.e. play the same setup against Wolves and make these personnel changes. I mean, Longstaff from the start was very slow and pedestrian, and I asked people on Twitter what was the reason. We've got Ryan here saying it doesn't help when Longstaff is pedestrian, and a lot of people pointing out that Longstaff did not have a good game. There were a few hospital passes. He was just off the pace. Should Lewis Miley have started from the off?
Look, potentially. I think, we've both said on this show in the last couple of weeks, I think for us, it would probably be Longstaff dropping out the team. And it's no slight on him. I think it just looks every week like he's playing with an injury. It looks every week like he's a yard off the pace, and he looks like he's in need of a good rest. And for whatever reason, Eddie Howe just refuses to give it to him. And it's been that way for the last 8 or 9 weeks. He's played 90 minutes every single game. I understand the need to protect Miley, given how young he is and how, he's been exposed to so much football, so much quicker than they anticipated it. But for whatever reason, I just can't understand why he won't give Longstaff that rest. Especially now you've got Willock back. And I just thought last night from the first minute, there was 3 or 4 times in the first half where Longstaff gave needless balls away. And what made him so good last season was his energy and how much he would work off the ball. And I mean, there was a moment last night where he lost the ball on the touchline, the far side touchline, and Chelsea started attacking. And my God, he was walking around as if he wanted to be anywhere else. So you don't know whether he's playing through an injury or whether he's playing through a little niggle. He was obviously out at the very, very start of the season with a foot problem, which I think has carried over from the summer. And I think if Joelinton or Tonali or Anderson was at full fitness, I think we'd probably see Longstaff maybe having a little spell out the team. But for whatever reason, he's still in there.
I mean, the midfield battle was absolutely key. Newcastle United lost it very early on. And I think what was quite noticeable was when Shearer Botman had the ball and they were gesturing for movement in the middle, and there was nothing at all. And for me, that's where Miley kind of is a real helpful asset, because he's always wanting the ball. He's always on the move. And it was, all three of them, Bruno, Willock and Longstaff, just were not moving. You could see the frustration. That had to go backwards, that had to go side to side, because there was no one moving. And the gaps were there as well, which is another big frustration, because as we say, Chelsea were awful and Newcastle had the chance to get a really important 3 points if they were just switched on. And the lack of energy, I'm going to say a lack of commitments. I'm not saying they turned up and thought, oh, we don't want to win this. Of course they did. But what I'm saying is they just didn't seem to want it as much as Chelsea. And I think the one thing more than anything else that showcases that is the third goal. Chelsea hit on the counter, and you watch Midik, he just breezes past Bruno. Now, look, as a relatively new dad, I understand he's not going to have had much sleep, but in a way, it was criminal, because he's got 4 or 5 yards on him, but he started behind him, and Bruno, by the end of it, is literally walking on the edge of the box and looking as he pops into the back of the net. I don't think that's acceptable. I think if certain players had put in the performance of Bruno last night, then the reaction would be something else to what it is.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, look, I think I know we've obviously just spent the last couple of minutes going in on Longstaff, and which I don't like doing, but Willock and Bruno, I thought last night were both off it, and what was so disappointing was how good Willock was at Wolves last week, and he looked like he was back was best and taking games by the scruff of his neck, constantly asking for the ball. last night it was as if, you didn't even realise he was on the pitch for big chunks of the game. Bruno as well, I thought was quiet. Obviously, as you've said, had a newborn, welcomed into the world over the weekend. Maybe that was playing on his mind, but I thought the midfield as a three just did not work last night. I thought Botman again was. I don't think he looked injured, but I think something that he's carrying, whether it's mentally or physically, just does not look like the Botman that we signed last summer. And I thought Fabian Schär as well last night was pretty poor. And you can probably throw, if I'm being honest, all of them into that category, apart from maybe Tino Livramento, who I thought was actually very, very good. But apart from that, you really, really struggle to look around that team and find good performances.
There seems to be a big lack of communication. Again, I keep making the point about the reaction after the goals are conceded, and there was only one real reaction last night, and that was for the second goal. And it's actually Sean Longstaff turns around and he's absolutely fuming that Palmer's had the space and time to pop that in the back of the net. But every other goal, again, it was hands on hips, walking away. There's no spirit, there's no reaction. I want to see players angry. I want to see players getting in the faces of each other and say, like, this can't happen. They just look like they're lacking the ability to talk to one another, they're lacking organization, and they're just lacking spirit.
Well, I think they're lacking that bite that we saw so often last season. When they were an awful team to play. Teams hated playing them. They were winding managers up. They were winding fans up. They were really becoming sort of public enemy number one. And then this season, it just seems like they're the complete opposite. They're just lying down for teams. Last night, they made it so easy. And as you say, I mean, there's only one sort of moment that I noticed, and it was Dubravka having a go at a couple of the players after the first and second goals, but no one was listening. Nobody was interested. And also, I think some of the problems last night probably came from Dubravka himself. I mean, that first goal where Botman just scuffs that lazy clearance, Dubravka really should be saying, that is my ball. He's under no pressure. And I think, again, it just goes back to that conversation we've been having for weeks, and I know it was talked about last night. And that is, Nick Pope and how important he is. Now, his return can't come quick enough. As much as I like Dubravka, I think there was a couple of those goals last night you thought, how have they gone in? Especially the first one. I know it takes a nick, but should do better. And I think his positioning for the second one as well, even though
I can see what you're saying about the positioning for the first one, but it should never get to that point.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Gus goes. Well, I can't say it. He's got a fog on me for it. He's gotten down the right, ball in the box. Okay, Dan Burns pretty much done everything he can do. Some might say he should do a little bit better, but okay, look, the ball's in the box. Botman just doesn't clear it, and then it falls to someone, and Ake has a space. Bruno turns his back, and then the ball's in the back of the net. I think it's a little bit harsh to go straight for Dubravka in that moment, because I think there's so many hours leading up to that goal.
I wasn't going straight for Dubravka saying he was at fault for that goal, but I think you can still point at the fact that Dubravka should have done better. I mean, I know it takes a very, very late touch, and he might have been unsighted, but I think his starting position when Palmer takes the shot is poor. His starting position for the second goal is even worse. He's basically stood at his far post when Palmer goes near post. I know it sticks through Botman's legs, but look, I just thought defensively it was a very, very poor performance, and as I said, I think Tino was the only one to really come out of it with any praise, mostly for what he did going forward rather than going backwards. But this is the thing, and I know we put a clip out on the Chronicle earlier, and I was watching it, and how has this team gone from being the joint best defence in the league to just completely crumbling? And Eddie Howe pointed out last night, they feel like they're going to concede goals now, whereas last season they didn't. You had that sort of air of invincibility around them, that they were going to keep clean sheets and teams weren't going to be able to score. And when you've got 80% of the same back five playing, I can't really work out why things have changed so much. So, yeah, look, they're shipping goals far too easily. And with not much option to change it off the bench, I don't know really where they go to fix it.
Well, we'll get on to the potential of Jamal Lascelles maybe coming in for them Botman, because I do think you've got to take him out of the firing line. I mean, for two of the goals, I'm not mistaken, he's been beaten. But we'll get into that in a moment. I mean, you mentioned Nick Pope there, that it been talked about on Sky Sports last night, and I've got the screen grab of what you're alluding to, and this is the defensive comparison between before Nick Pope was injured and since. So goals conceded with Pope, 14; without Pope, 14. Clean sheet 6 with Pope, 2. Sorry, goals conceded 34 without Pope. Sorry, and 14 with Pope. Clean sheet 6 with Pope, 2 without. Conceded 3 or more goals once with Nick Pope, 8 times since Nick Pope has been out. Shots faced per game, 16.6 for Dubravka, 11.6 for Pope. Save ratio, 67% down since Pope's out, and then 74% when Pope's in. And keeper sweep-ins, which I'm not entirely sure what that means, but 5 since Pope's been out and 11 with him in. So I'm assuming that means him coming out to a certain area. But I mean,
just
look,
on that, I mean, Ian Wright last night on Sky said, "Oh well,
he was
Nick
so
Pope
good, wasn't he? Like he hit
he
every nail on the head."
He didn't hit every nail on the head, because one
Didn't?
thing he said that I don't think was very spot on was, we all know Nick Pope's a very, very good sweeper keeper, which I think some would maybe disagree with.
I thought
But apart from that, he got it spot on. But yeah,
he said shot stopper, didn't he?
no,
Anyway, but
yeah. Anyway, he probably did say shot stopper at one point, but he definitely also said that he thought he was a very good sweeper keeper, which I don't think he is. But that's just my one tiny gripe with lovely Ian.
but those stats are alarming, aren't they? I mean, they've conceded the most goals since December on the road, 24 in 9 away games. But to concede 3 or more goals since December 8 times. I mean, goodness me. I mean, that's just, I didn't even realize it was that bad.
Well, I mean, how are you supposed to put runs together and wins together when you're conceding that amount? I mean, even 2 against Luton, 2 and 4 against Luton and Bournemouth. You obviously had Liverpool on New Year's Day, where they conceded 4 as well. Arsenal 4, Chelsea 3. It's just the list goes on. But and as you say, it's just such a shock because of how compact and resilient that defence was last season, and we didn't have any problems with them at all. And I know obviously Pope's been out for a big chunk and he's missed 3 or 4 months, but Dubravka, I actually think, has been all right during that period. As daft as it sounds, he has actually put in some good performances. He's kept them in a lot of games. But I just think going forward, you need to... And I think, look, again, we should probably talk
What is
about...
it? Is it his organisation? Is it his speaking? Why does Martin Dubravka in goal have such a negative impact, for want of a better way to describe it, on this Newcastle United defence?
I don't think he commands that defence anything like Nick Pope does. I don't think he commands the area like Nick Pope does, even though Pope at times has been a little bit questionable in terms of coming out for crosses. I don't think Dubravka does it as well. I don't think he maybe has the same understanding as with the back four as Pope does. I think there's a lot of things, and I think maybe there's a part that's saying, I mean, Dubravka's he's getting on now. He's pushing, mid-30s. He's not getting any younger. And I know he's probably only 4 or 5 years older than Pope, but I don't think he's maybe the keeper that he once was at Newcastle United. He had a long time of not playing, which has no doubt affected him. And I think, there's questions that come in the summer as to what Newcastle do in the goalkeeping department. Do they go out and get a number 2 who can fill in for Nick Pope and sort of replace Dubravka as the number 2? Or do they say, right, well, we want to go out and get a goalkeeper who's really, really good with his feet and who can play out from the back and who's, very experienced, played in the Champions League, and he comes in and challenges Pope or replaces Pope. I think you also, again, and I wrote about this last week, I think you need to be looking as well at strengthening left back and centre back. I think, they need upgrades in these positions. Fabian Schär has been fantastic. He's been one of the players of the season, but if Schär or Botman, drop out and then you're looking at Lascelles or Alex Murphy or Dummett or Kraft coming in, that isn't the squad depth you want for a team chasing Champions League football or European football. So again, we're going to talk about these, these priorities that we always do, as what needs to come first, a striker, a midfielder. But I think very, very high on that list, they need a extra reinforcements at centre back, and I think they need an upgrade at left back. And I think there's questions to be asked about what they're doing about the goalkeeping department on a larger scale this summer.
But in the short term, does Jamal Lascelles come in for Sven Botman because he's clearly not up to scratch? Maybe he needs more than just a game away from the action. He needs maybe a couple of weeks or what have you, just away from it, because you can clearly see he's lacking pace, he's lacking confidence, he doesn't look happy, and maybe taking him out of the firing line for a couple of weeks might be the best thing for him.
Yeah, look, maybe he did that a couple of weeks ago, didn't he? And Lascelles came in and didn't really fare too well. So I think, you run that risk of if Lascelles does drop a clanger or a stinker, then you're opening yourself up to...
First real mistake, though, this
No,
season.
it was. And look, I don't want to rewrite history. He was absolutely fantastic when he came in for that, extended period while Botman was out with that knee problem. Look, I don't know. I think that, but there's definitely something not right with Botman, and I think if you were to take him out, now's the time to do it, when he's probably, clearly still carrying something, as I said, either in his head or physically.
Now is the time to do it when you haven't got to face Haaland, perhaps.
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah, that's a good point.
But is the fact that Botman's struggling? You've got Dan Burn, who's clearly the one who's getting targeted week in, week out. Trippier's confidence has hit a bit of a dip of late. With all that in mind, is it therefore a little bit unfair to put all this blame on Martin Dubravka? Because actually there's so many elements in that back line, and that's why Newcastle are conceding the goals. Or is it because Nick Pope's not there commanding the box? The direct consequences of that is Trippier, Botman, Burn, they don't feel as confident, and they're not clicking as much with Dubravka as they do with Nick Pope.
I think I don't think you can pinpoint it to one thing, and I don't want this to seem like I'm just absolutely slating Martin Dubravka and that Newcastle's lack of clean sheets and constant leaking of goals is solely his fault. I think it's a huge combination. I think the fact that Dan Burn is constantly looked under pressure will no doubt seep into those other defenders. Botman hasn't looked as assured next to him as he has before. Fabian Schär has been playing through the pain pretty much every week, to make sure that he's there. Trippier obviously went through that bad patch, and Botman is trying to recover from a very, very serious knee problem. And Dubravka has came back into the team, by the way, after 2 years of no first team football, and is clearly still battling some sort of illness, in the last couple of weeks himself, which is why we saw Karius coming to Arsenal. So I think it's a combination of those things. I also think you look at that midfield and they're getting, the defence is getting a lot less support than they were this time last year when that midfield was solid and everyone knew their roles. And now that the options are so thin on the ground, I think these players are running into the ground, and I think it's all just adding up. We even saw last night, Anthony Gordon failing to track back and cover Dan Burn, which very, very rarely happens. And Malo Gusto at right back was having a field day down that right channel for the first 30 minutes. All these things add up to the fact that Newcastle's defence just isn't where it was. But if it doesn't get sorted, then Newcastle don't get sorted.
It could be a terrible tally at the end of the season of goals conceded. And a lot of people would ask, Aaron, how did they look so knackered and so tired and so off the pace when they had, 11 days to prep?
Well, we always said, didn't we, that when they got knocked out of Europe and they got knocked out of the League Cup, and Eddie Howe actually finally got players back on the training ground, that they were going to be reinvigorated and back to the Newcastle, of old, running, non-stop. And for whatever reason, it just hasn't been like that. They look very, very leggy at Arsenal. They looked leggy at Blackburn, which was another game they had a long time to prepare for. So yeah, look, I don't know the answer, and I don't want to harp back to this excuse of injuries, but they clearly don't have enough options that as much as they'd like to rotate. I think in an ideal world, Longstaff would have a period out, but they can't do it. Willock would have been eased back in gradually. The same with Isak. They don't have this massive swell of options, and that looks to have got even worse last night with Gordon limping off and obviously Harvey Barnes out for a couple of games. Add into that Trippier, Joelinton, Pope, Wilson, they are still running very, very depleted. And I don't want it to look like we're harping back to the same excuse of Well, they've got injuries, but you can't ignore that fact still.
No, it's valid, but I don't think it rubs away the total lack of want and desire last night that was shown pretty much all over the pitch, because that's what Chelsea had in abundance and what Newcastle United didn't. And yes, you're going to be tired and what have you. You've played a lot of minutes. It's not really an option to change it up, but you've also got the best facilities possible. You've got the best diet plans. You've got the best chefs in the house. You know what I mean? Like, this is what you're paid for. Alan Shearer made the point a few months back that he doesn't buy the whole tired excuse, because you've got everything there to help you recover faster and better than the average man on the street. And again, the amount of days they've had to prep, tiredness, is it a really valid argument this time around? I'm not too sure it was. They just they were just second best in every instance of the game, and it was unacceptable, to be quite frank. And it goes back to the point about the setup, Aaron, because if you're going to set up and try and high press, you've got to have that intensity, but they just didn't have it. And I'm not actually sure that actually sitting deep would have made a difference if they were playing with the same amount of energy, because you've got to hit on the counter, you've got to be compact. But if you see it all comes down to what the players have got in the engine. And I think regardless of the system, if the energy's not there, the desire's not there, then you're struggling right from the start.
Yeah, look, I think that's exactly it. I think mentally they weren't right last night. You can talk about the physical all day long, but when they're not in that mood, and we've seen it so many times when they go away from home this season, they just look like a totally different team, for the worse. And I think that was again what we saw last night, which obviously bodes really, really well for a nice away trip to the Etihad on Saturday afternoon.
Doesn't it just? The sunshine's come out for the first time in about 3 or 4 days. Just shining through my window here.
Got a glow on your face all of a sudden.
To say maybe someone upstairs is thinking we're about to find a positive. Well, let's do that then.
Yes.
Tino Livramento in at right back, shifted over to the left. He was, everywhere. He was the one real positive to come out of last night. He looks like a real talent. He's going to get called up to the England squad, hopefully on Thursday, because he's, he could be a really good option for Gareth Southgate. What a talent Newcastle United have got. And with every kind of full game, the more minutes he gets under his belt, the chance to actually get a proper run in the team, he's looking more and more like a bargain, isn't he, really?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, it's getting to the stage now where, if I'm completely honest, I don't care if it's left back or right midfielder in goal. I just want Tino Livramento starting every single game for Newcastle United, because he hasn't put a foot wrong. And I think there was so much clamour to bring him back in, and how resisted and stuck with Dan Burn. But I just think Livramento, wherever he plays, makes this team look better. Clearly playing with a lot of confidence, and especially, in the grand scheme of things, being so soon back from such a lengthy layoff, first a knee injury, then in a hamstring injury. He just looks like he hasn't had that 2 or 3 years on the sidelines, and he's just completely continued that progressions from when he came through at Chelsea and then Southampton. And look, all the talk last night was about Anthony Gordon and that England call-up. If I was Gareth Southgate last night, how long is it until Tino Livramento finally gets that shout? He's played at every level, at youth level for England. He can still obviously move his allegiance if he wants. If I was Gareth Southgate, I'd be getting that locked down. If it's not this summer, I think you need to be doing it the first squad after the Euros. But he looked really, really good last night, really confident. What I loved about it was the fact he was picking the ball up and just driving, just running. And Chelsea really looked like they were targeting him. I think he got fouled 7 times in the game. Sterling got booked for fouling him. Saucedo got booked for fouling him. And it looked like every time he got the ball and he was on the run, they were just told, just take him out. He was really, really dangerous last night. And as I say, I don't care where it is, just give him a constant run in this team, because I really want to see it. Not just because he's been in my fancy team for about 3 months.
You're very impressed with him, and understandably so. Eddie Howe actually singled him out for praise as well, and he said he could be proud of the performance. So I did ask people last night to get in touch on social media and just tell me what the difference was from that performance against Wolves to the performance we saw against Chelsea. And I've read a few out, but we'll dive in. I mean, I got quite a few responses. Stuart says, I don't know where to start. Tactically shifted, which is a surprise. Back to being open and stretched. Ryan says, why did Eddie Howe change it from last week? Brian says, I actually think we played decent today, but had a few costly errors. Ken says, Chelsea had attacking threats, Wolves didn't, and some woeful defensive mistakes. Matthew says the inability and stubbornness to change from 4-3-3 despite our very limited options. He says he should go at 5 at the back. DM says how, like most of the squad, are leveling off. Unfortunately, defensive frailties is one that a lot of people are putting out. Jay says a lack of belief, hunger, and intensity. Silly defensive errors resulting in goals. Fred points out that Bruno's not a central defensive midfielder. Nicola says there was no Trippier, and then Chelsea marked Willock out of the game. Burn was targeted. We've got a few people pointing out they think that Eddie Howe is too stubborn. He needs to change his tactics up. But it's fair to say, Aaron, people are not feeling, quite understandably not feeling happy about this performance.
No, and look, rightly so. And I think it's part of a wider thing that we see on social media. And look at, I'm hesitant to look at too much of what people are saying on social media because I know it's an echo chamber, and people in the heat of the moment can tweet whatever they want after a game, which we saw last night. But we have seen this a lot more often recently. We've seen it a lot after last night. We saw it a lot after Arsenal. The dial's just starting to turn a little bit in the wrong direction in terms of the feeling around the club, which is a shame, isn't it? But I think it goes back to that point that we've made a lot of times, and that is Eddie Howe and this Newcastle team are sort of victims of their own success because of how well they did last season. But certainly, yeah, I think, just judging off what I saw on Twitter alone last night, there was some very, very unhappy fans, and rightly so.
Let's talk about that injury to Anthony Gordon. It seemed like something had happened quite early on, and then he's gone down about 36th minute or so. He's come off. It didn't look like he left the stadium with any protection or what have you. They'll have a scan, won't they, to try and figure out whether he's available for Saturday in the cup. But first off, how big of a blow was it to lose him last night? And if he is indeed out for even just the game against City, how big of a blow is that?
Well, I think you'd have to say absolutely massive, because he's probably been one of the second or third most informed Newcastle players for the last 3 months, if not this season. And yeah, look, he didn't have a very good game last night. I thought Gordon, in the very limited time he was on, as we've already touched on, he was getting reprimanded quite a bit from Howe and Tyndall to track back and cover Burn. He looked all right on the ball, but you could tell from very, very early on there was something not quite right with him. And as you said, he sort of pulled up early when he was out on the left and looked like he could shake it off. And funnily enough, they actually sent a physio around to that side of the pitch just to keep an eye on him. And then a couple of minutes later, Howe swapped him with Miggy Almiron, and he was playing on the right, and Cucurellas tackled him, and straight away you can see that knee go. And we don't know the severity of it yet, but it isn't looking good. And I think, if it is a knee problem, then I think we're probably looking at a couple of weeks on the sidelines at the very least. Which, given the fact, as we've mentioned, Harvey Barnes looks like he's out for another spell. And they've got very, very limited options in every position on the pitch. But now, again, up front, it's a huge blow. And also, personally, Gareth Southgate announces that final England squad before the Euros later this week. And if Anthony Gordon's name was on there and it was to be taken off in this manner, then it'd be very, very untimely and very, very cruel.
It would indeed. And just my luck when I was hoping Cole Palmer would have an awful game. He has an absolute belter game, and that's just to throw it in there with my confidence Newcastle would get all 3 points. I'm just going to keep my mouth shut from now on. I'm going to go back to being Mr. Negative, because that's when Newcastle United win. I'd rather be Mr. Negative and then be proved wrong than be Mr. Positive and proved wrong, because it hurts a little bit. Eddie Howe, we've spoken a little bit about what he said, Aaron, but I'm going to read a few more of his quotes, because, as you say, some of what he said, people were questioning, shall we say. We were good in good spells, but obviously not good enough overall because the goals we conceded were really poor. I don't think we had a problem with the overall flow of the game. We were competitive and creative. The final ball maybe was not there or not good enough today. We had a lot of opportunities to test their back four. Did they? Because I'm not too sure they did. I mean, really, the only positive I can think of is Tino Livramento. I mean, look, Isaac and Jacob Murphy score 2 wonderful goals, but were Chelsea really anything other than comfortable?
No, I don't think so. I think Newcastle really actually struggled, and I think they get that goal before half time. They come out for the second half, and Miggy Almiron tests the goalkeeper after about 2 minutes of the second half, and he thought, okay, finally we're going to see Newcastle actually turning the screw and putting Chelsea under a bit of pressure. And instead, within about 2 minutes after that chance, Chelsea were back on the back foot, and a couple of minutes later they score through Palmer, which with really poor defending. So I don't think there was ever really a prolonged period where Newcastle looked like they were really, really going to win the game. And even when Murphy scores out the blue and all of a sudden Newcastle were back in it, it just looked like it was just straight back to normal, and they reverted to type when it was 3-2 and they were chasing the game in 6 minutes. I mean, Sean Longstaff wins a free kick, and I think it was the 94th minute, just in front of the halfway line. You're thinking, okay, get everyone up the pitch, get the ball pumped into the box. Let's try and nick a late goal by sticking it in the mixer. And instead, he just compounds his fantastic performance by playing a little short free kick. And within 30 seconds, Newcastle lost the ball. And that pretty much summed up the night, if I'm completely honest. So I know Ian Wright, again, was speaking a little bit about Eddie Howe's comments, and he sort of said he disagreed with what Howe said. And I think that was probably the consensus. I know he's got to find positives in performances like that, but I didn't think Newcastle were positive or good in spells at all. I thought they were really quite average on the night.
He can't be saying that behind closed doors, right? He's saying that because, as you say, he needs to find the positives. He's not going to come out and just say we were rubbish. He's going to say we were bad. We had some good moments, etc. But he can't be behind closed doors maintaining that line. He's got to be going in and saying, guys, you were dire.
Yeah.
You didn't want the ball as much as Chelsea. Where's the yard of pace gone on each and every one of you? Where's the organisation? Poor Alexander Isak, so isolated up top. He's got to be surely away from the cameras, laying into the players in many ways and saying this is not good enough, because the way he likes to set up teams, we saw last year, few teams can touch Newcastle United, but it's got to have every single player buying into it. And what you saw against Chelsea, with all due respect, was probably 9-10 of the players. Maybe that's a little bit high, but most of the players just not turning up on the day. And it only needs 2 or 3 for it to crumble, let alone nearly a full roster.
Yeah, 100%. I don't think he'll be saying that to the players, what he said to the media last night. And if he is, then I'd be very, very worried, because if he's telling those players that was a good performance, yeah. As you say, he's never going to come out and say that, though, is he? He's never going to come out to us and say that was really, really shambolic and dire and average. And he has to put that face on, doesn't he?
He did look angry. He did look very angry on the touchline.
He did, and he looked very, very agitated during the game. And I think, he was probably just copying what every single Newcastle fan felt, because it was a very, very uncomfortable game to watch for Newcastle. The architects of their own downfall for the majority of it. And look, City away on Saturday is obviously the toughest game you can get to follow this game up, but we need to see so much more from Newcastle than we saw away at Arsenal, away at Chelsea. They can't be letting City have it all their own way. We've seen in the last couple of seasons that when Newcastle get close to City, we've already seen it this season that they can beat them. We saw last year that they could obviously take points off them. I know that those results of both came at home, but never say never, but you need such a improved performance at the Etihad. Otherwise, you go into that West Ham game after a really long break thinking, okay, they're maybe in a little bit of trouble here.
Yeah, you can't play like that against Manchester City, because they will just absolutely annihilate you. And it's that high intensity that Newcastle will need against City that was lacking against Chelsea, just standing off the opposition. Man City will just absolutely punish you, because we know the way they slick it about the pitch, the way they pass the ball. Newcastle United need to be just at the legs, at the ankles of the opposition, we know they can do it. It's what the team was built on last season, but for whatever reason, it's been lacking for the large part of this season. And honestly, well, if Newcastle play like that against City, then it could be quite embarrassing. But hopefully they can get onto the pitch and work on it this week. If you're Sean Longstaff, if you're Dan Burn, if you're Bruno, perhaps, and you're looking tired, you can see it in your face, you can see it in the performances. Do professional footballers are, and do you think they go and knock on the door of the manager and say, "Right, Gaffer, I really want to play, but I'm just so tired that I don't think I'd be a benefit to the team"?
No, I think these type of players, especially the likes of Longstaff and Burn, just to single those two out, I think they'll want to be playing every single game. I don't think they'll want to risk losing their place in this team if they don't have to. And maybe that's to the detriment of the club. I certainly think Burn, after the last couple of weeks, probably wasn't saying to how I want to be taken out of the team, even though it probably would have been for the better of the team when he was enduring that really tricky period in the last couple of weeks. And also, I mean, someone made the point in a reply to one of my tweets last night about Sean Longstaff as, what does Howe do in some of these situations? You couldn't really have taken Dan Burn out of the firing line last night because you don't have Tino Livramento to come in as left back because he's already at right back. We've talked about Miley potentially coming in for Longstaff, but I think these players will want to play because they know if they lose their place in this team, it's very, very hard to get it back.
But changes do need to be made because, like we say, Longstaff and Burn are probably the weak links at the moment. But hopefully, like we say, they can turn that around. Goodness me, I'm trying to find some more positives because this has been a thoroughly depressing podcast. But the performance last night just really deflated us. I'd rather lose. You just want to see a bit of desire and commitment. And when you perform that badly against a team who is awful, Newcastle are a better side than Chelsea, it really does hurt somewhat. It's disappointing to say at the very least. Harvey Barnes.
I've got some positives for you, but I'll probably be accused of clutching at straws, and I'll openly admit I probably am. But come on, let's not make this a full hour-long session of depression.
Well, we've had one. We've had Tino Livramento, so there's one.
Again, clutching at straws, but Bruno gets through another game without a yellow card. We're counting that as a positive these days.
Come on, we've had this argument. Was it last week?
Sure.
That's all you've got to hold up again about Bruno's performance. The fact he's come through without a yellow card.
Is it a positive or is it a negative?
No, I'm not giving you this time, right? Because
is it a positive that he got through another game or not?
No,
it's not.
No, it's a negative. It's a negative, right?
Now we're just being childish.
No, listen to it. It's a negative because you want to be holding up something else as the positive. Simply say the best thing Bruno did all night was did not get a yellow card shows you how ineffective Bruno was.
That's not what I'm saying. Is it a positive or is it a negative that Bruno got through another game without a yellow card?
I mean, of course it's a positive, but it's
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Joe Willock, another 90 minutes under his belt. As poor and as invisible as he was, he gets through another game unscathed. Alexander Isak on the score sheet again, adding to his run of goals.
Striker scores goals.
Is it a positive that he scored a goal, or is it a negative?
We're gonna have, right?
Andrew, please. Is it a positive or is it a negative?
I mean, it was a lovely goal.
It was a lovely goal as well, out of nothing. So that.
I mean, in many ways, though, I have to be honest. Just to take your positive and inverted commas and turn it around, all I could think about last night was, goodness me, if you're Alexander Isak and you sit through many more of these performances, will your agent be picking up the phone in the summer and thinking, can you get me a move to somewhere else? Because he's something special, that kid.
He is, but I mean, look, we've seen Bruno sign a new deal at the club. Joe Linton is very much on the way to signing a new deal at the club. I think you're maybe being a little bit hasty in thinking that just because Newcastle finish outside of Europe this season, potentially, that all of a sudden there's going to be an excess of players. I certainly think there'll be interest in Isak, but I'd like to think he would give them another year to get back in there and then say, right, guys, I'm sorry, but I need to be elsewhere. And you couldn't really blame him if Newcastle spent 2 years out of Europe. but they're gonna qualify for the Conference League and win the FA Cup. So
There we go. I'm loving that.
And there's
All I
another
can see,
positive for you. There we go.
all I can see now is Bruno on the pitch against Manchester City as they're lining up, and he's doing his best Scott Parker impression in his tracksuit with a little frame. Like I was into a cup, but it'll be getting through a 9th game without yellow card, presented by Aaron Stokes.
Yeah,
But yeah, so there's a positive. Just quickly about Harvey Barnes, because he's been getting a bit of stick because he's picked up another injury, and we're both big fans of Harvey Barnes, and I think it's really unfair because he's going to be worth every single penny. I mean, I did the stats last night, and he's, I think, started 66 games of the last of 76. So out of the last 2 campaigns he played for Leicester, he started 66 games. So he hasn't had massive injuries before. I think he had one where he missed 128 days, which was like 16 games or something. But other than that, he's been consistent. I think it was 25, 34, 36. That was his last 3 seasons at Leicester. He's been really unlucky this season, and people questioning the signing, saying he's going to be a waste of money. Look, if you want to do that, then you could ask the same about Sandro Tonali. Just because it's not an injury, he's missed the season. Do you know what I mean? So are people asking about Tonali? No. I think Barnes has been really unfortunate. I think people should just get behind him, because what we've seen from him in glimpses is very, very special. And he's going to be a top player for Newcastle, in my opinion.
He just needs a run of games, doesn't he? I think we, as you say, we've seen glimpses. I don't think we've seen anywhere near what we saw at Leicester, because I was very, very excited when Newcastle got him through the door. Obviously, a very, very freak foot injury at the start of the season, and now it looks like a minor hamstring problem, as it's been described, which should keep him out for a couple of games. You've got to hope that isn't any more than that, because he's already missed more than enough football this season.
He's missed more games this season for Newcastle United than he did in his entirety of the Premier League with Leicester.
And I think it is down to bad luck, isn't it? I mean, that injury could have happened to absolutely anybody at Sheffield United. Hopefully, you can get over this one quickly. But I'm completely with you. I did see, again, should just stay off social media, really, because if people think we're negative, then they should just go on Twitter. And I did see people writing off Harvey Barnes, and I think weirdly, Tonali and Lewis Hall have something to do with that, because you've essentially got 3 of Newcastle's 4 summer signings who aren't playing at the minute, really, are you? And all for very, very different reasons. And I think that's just added to the sort of negativity around it. But give him time; he's still young enough. Very, very talented player when he wants to be, and hopefully we see him back very soon, along with Anthony Gordon. But just not. I don't think we'll see him until potentially West Ham, at least.
Which is a massive, massive blow, because you'd want Harvey Barnes to replace Anthony Gordon in the situation that Newcastle find themselves in. But as it is, both are out. Before we get on to the trivia, Aaron, Eddie Howe, some calling for him to go, some questioning his position. It's understood, he's got the full backing of the ownership, even if Newcastle United don't qualify for Europe. Still the man to lead Newcastle United forward?
Yeah, absolutely. As I've said, I think that the tide is starting to turn slowly, but I'm very, very minority, a minority of the fan base. I don't think it's this huge groundswell of support from the go. But I think, as we've been saying the last couple of weeks, the next couple of weeks and months are crucial, because it's all well and good if it's to believe that the ownership do have support, even if he doesn't get to Europe. But I think that having the fan support is a very different matter. And a lot of level-headed fans have already said, even if they don't get Europe or a cup run this season, they'll happily have him in the dugout next year, leading Newcastle with hopefully a few more signings and players back. And I would subscribe to that. Everybody knows my thoughts on how I really like him. He's got the credit in the bank for me, and I think, as I said, because of how much Newcastle overachieved last year, he's been negatively portrayed this time around. Yes, he's made mistakes. Yes, the season could still be very, very bad if they don't finish in Europe or have a cup run. But I still think Howe deserves time to get it right.
I guess, given what we're expecting this summer, that's probably where some might raise the question further, because we expect them to spend quite a bit of money strengthening this team, and it does in many ways feel like Newcastle United's coming to the end of its shelf life of the current crop, and it's going to require some big investment in the summer, and you want to make sure you got full confidence in your manager to pick the right players to come in and then to manage them into a top team. And we believe Eddie Howe's got that. We're backing Eddie Howe to do that. He does have to learn, though, doesn't he, from maybe some of the mistakes. And Chelsea, there was quite a few mistakes that he will have to learn from in terms of the tactical setup, maybe the substitutions as well, personnel.
Yeah, look, definitely. I don't think he's without blame for some of the issues they've had this season. We can talk all day about some of the selection decisions, some of the in-game decisions, the game management. We can talk all day about, where on earth Lewis Hall's been and Tino Livramento not playing enough. We can say all these things. I don't think Howe is without blame, but I also don't think he is the main cause and root of these problems by any stretch. And I think as long as the players still back him, which, it's evident they do, I think that's good enough for me.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Any words for Anthony Gordon, if indeed he has injured his ACL? You are the ACL man. Any words?
Be prepared for a very lengthy layoff, a lot of physio, and some lovely, well, in my case, I had some lovely knee-length red knitted stockings to wear for the first couple of days to keep my circulation there, which I'm sure you'll look very fitting in. Yeah, look, it's a brutal injury to come back from, if that is indeed what it is. Hopefully it isn't. Tino Livramento and Callum Wilson will surely be giving him plenty of advice. And if he wants any off me, he's welcome around for a cup or any time. I'll talk him through it.
And Aaron's getting back to fitness, ladies and gents. He's at the gym every single morning, and he's doing park runs as well.
I've even got you into the park run spirit.
That was a shameful attempt to drive you down that road so I could brag about my park run time.
I read you like a book. I knew that was why you were bringing it up.
Look at that. My first park run since September, and I think I beat Aaron's time by a good 4 minutes or so. But he was too lazy to do it on Saturday. He was in bed. So
4 minutes is a stretch. A minute at most.
Right. Okay. I'll need to see evidence of that. But let's get on to the trivia then. Nice, easy one. Nice, fun one. And actually, before we do that, I just want to point you guys in the direction of the latest episode of Get in the Bin with me and Sam Mulliner. You're not getting in the bin with me and Sam Mulliner, but there's 2 items that we would like to have in the bin, and only one can get in. This week, it's FA Cup semi-finals at Wembley. So hopefully Newcastle are in that after Saturday, fingers crossed, versus agent fees. Sam wants to get rid of agent fees. I want to get rid of FA Cup semi-finals at Wembley. It's a tie, so we're going to run a poll. Toon has already retweeted the poll. Make sure you vote on Twitter. Aaron, which one are you pushing in the bin?
I would get rid of FA Cup semi-finals at Wembley.
Yes. Head over to the YouTube channel to watch up, because I am very passionate about that one. Right. Trivia it is then. I want you to name, Aaron, the top 10 Newcastle United players. So with the most assists in the Premier League. The top 10 Newcastle United players with the most assists in the Premier League. I can give you the nationalities to help you out. Do you want to go from 10 to 1, or do you want to just chuck some numbers out?
I think we're just going to chuck this is all time, yeah?
Yeah, all time Premier League top 10 assists.
Right, well, we'll start off with Nobby Solano.
Number 1, 54.
Okay, so that's the starting block, 54.
Yeah.
We will go with Laurent Robert.
Laurent Robert is in there, number 4, 29.
Okay.
You've got one man still at the club at this moment in time.
Well, we won't go for that one now, but we'll go, given his longevity, we'll go Shearer.
Alan Shearer, number 2, 36 assists.
We'll go with Shola.
Yep, number 7, 20 assists.
We will go with
you have another man at number 3 who was here for a decade. Good pals with Shearer.
Rob Lee.
Yeah, Rob Lee, 31 assists. Then you've got 4, Laurent Robert. Number 5, a man with 26 assists and arguably the greatest ever Newcastle United player I've seen. He'd be worth 150, 200 million in today's money.
Hang on. The best Newcastle United player you've ever seen?
Oh, the things he could do with the ball, it would stick to his feet like it was Velcro.
Ben Arfa?
No. Englishman, played for Liverpool and Everton.
Oh, Beardsley.
Yeah, then number joint 5th actually is another Englishman, 26 assists. Didn't have the best injury record, but was pacey out on the flank.
Rude
Ruud Gullit handed him Rob Lee's number 7 jersey. A shameful attempt to push Rob Lee out of the club. I thought you would have got it with that clue.
Don't know.
It was a dire decision.
Oh, Kieran.
There we go. Then you've got number 7 on the list, Shola Ameobi. Number 8, the man who's currently still at Newcastle United, a Scottish international.
Matt Ritchie.
Yep. Number joint 8, a man who recently left the club. Some people think Newcastle would be better with him still at the club instead of Harvey Barnes, which is a
happy birthday, by the way, to Alan St. Maximin.
Yes, and another Frenchman at number 10, who I actually think, when you talk about players I would have loved to have seen under certain managers, I'd love to have seen this guy under Rafa Benitez. I would love to have seen this guy under Eddie Howe, but Rafa Benitez had to let him go because he went to join Tottenham.
Oh, Musa Sissoko.
There we go. 17 assists for Musa Sissoko. So there you go, ladies and gents. The top 10 list of the Newcastle United players with the most Premier League assists. Alberto Solano, top 8 with 54. What a player. What a provider. This has been the Everything is Black and White podcast. Hope you guys have enjoyed this episode with me and Aaron. If you're listening on the podcast channel, please leave us a rating review. We want to get those reviews up to 300. And when we hit the 300th review, we'll offer a prize up. So please do leave us a rating and review. If you're on YouTube, give this video a thumbs up, hit subscribe, and head over to chroniclelive.co.uk for all the latest Newcastle United news and get ready for another week full of podcasts this week. We've got Gibbo coming with a match preview. We'll have a view from the opposition on Friday, and we'll have in conversation with Lee Ryder as well. So plenty to come. Thank you very much as always, and we'll see you guys very soon.